When it comes to breakfast around here, most days we keep things very simple. Some leftover sourdough bread sitting on the countertop will become toast with eggs, yogurt smoothies, fruit. These are the types of things that we rely on again and again. Another thing that we make all the time is whole grain waffles. We do a lot of sourdough around here, as you all well know. But I also like to make a lot of things with freshly milled whole grains because they're nutritious. It's fast. It's something that I can whip up in no time at all. And waffles really fits the bill because we have a waffle iron that does 4 waffles at a time, which means I can whip up a lot very quickly for my large family. This morning I have a whole jar of egg whites because we were using the yellows, the yolks, to make something yesterday or the day before. I can't even remember what it was. But I know now that we have a big jar of egg whites sitting in the refrigerator. I like to use these kind of things in pancakes or in waffles because nobody wants to have a pan full of just egg whites. I have one daughter who really likes to bake, so it's a common sight for me to see either egg whites or egg yolks in a jar in the refrigerator, depending on what she was making. If she was making a meringue, we'll have a whole bunch of egg yolks. If we were using egg yolks to brush the top of a baked good to make it brown or make a big pot of pudding, that's another common reason that we use a whole bunch of yolks. But either way, they don't go to waste around here. I will throw them in something where you don't necessarily notice the eggs, something like a meatloaf or even a lasagna in with the ricotta or farmer's cheese. So today I am going to just add that to my waffle recipe. I have no clue how many are in there, but I know that either way it's going to turn out fine. For waffles, I prefer to use soft white wheat berries. I will do 130 grams per cup of flour. You can use that replacement in any waffle recipe, but we do have a brand new recipe on farmhouseonboone.com for whole grain waffles, so you can head over there, print it off. Any recipes that I'm using in this video, I will link down below. I like to serve waffles with something higher in protein. Since we aren't using eggs for part of our meal today, I will just make up some protein milk. Typically, I like to add collagen peptides, colostrum, some peanut butter, banana, cocoa powder, whatever combination of those things, and the kids will gulp it right down. We currently have a fabulous source of local raw milk, so we serve something milk related with just about every single meal and especially breakfast because we can actually get a really large quantity right now locally. When we get back to our farm, we are definitely planning on getting a dairy cow again. I cannot wait to have that fresh Jersey milk. The farm that we get our milk from right now, she milks a Holstein, so plenty of quantity. We usually get about 7 gallons per week right now. I usually do add chocolate chips when I'm serving waffles to my kids. This means that we don't have to use as much syrup or honey because they're already sweetened this way, which means it's even easier to serve. A lot of times I do drizzle it with a bit of honey, but just chocolate chip waffles will work great as well. And I feel good about it because they're whole grain and we have all of that protein with the milk. Another breakfast that we reach for again and again, especially on busy weekdays when we have homeschool to do, is granola because again, I can serve it with fresh, whole, raw milk and I can make a bunch of it ahead in large quantities so we can eat it all throughout the week. Any morning where we're a little busy or the baby was up a lot overnight or I just want to sit there longer in the morning and drink my coffee before homeschool, granola on hand really saves us from having to get up and make a nice breakfast because it'll be sitting there in a glass jar ready to pour into a bowl with some milk. Super simple and fast. I love that I can switch up granola to make it more of a seasonal flavor. You can also add whatever it is you have a lot of. If you're trying to use up a bunch of your pantry staples before ordering new, before a big restock, granola is a great way to use a lot of those things. So for my winter breakfast menu, I'm going to be making a cranberry brown sugar pecan granola. Now, normally I use honey, but for a little variety, I'm going to use brown sugar. My daughter, after eating this for about a week, was like, "What did you put in that granola that made it so much better?" I'm like, well, instead of honey this time, I did brown sugar. It's also really delicious to add some maple, so a maple brown sugar flavor. For this granola, I melted coconut oil, added brown sugar, oatmeal, coconut. I also pulse pecans in the blender. I don't really measure, I just like to make sure that there's enough oil or fat, whatever fat you use, to toast the grains, and then also enough sugar or honey or maple syrup or any combination thereof to make sure that it's sweet enough. So I kind of just taste as I go and then put it in the oven to toast everything. After baking, I toss in dried fruit. So for today, I'm doing dried cranberries. We often do raisins. Sometimes I will even throw in things like apricots, dates, figs, chopped up. That's really good for a nice rustic granola. I have a few different granola recipes over on the website. There's a sourdough granola, there's a rustic granola, and there's also a granola bar, which is great if you want to take this on the go. Our homeschool routine is in full swing around here in the wintertime, and we like to be involved in our children's education. Whether your kids go to school or are homeschooled, there are plenty of opportunities to be involved as a parent when they're home, and IXL is the perfect tool to do so. Thanks IXL for partnering with me on today's video. IXL is an online learning program designed to help every child reach their potential, no matter their level or skills. They offer interactive practice for math, science, language arts, and social studies. They offer clear explanations to help students correct their mistakes so they can improve their skills and level up. There are lessons from pre-K all the way up to calculus, and everything is organized by grade, subject, and topic, making it super simple to find the support your child needs. One of my favorite features on IXL is recommendation. As your child practices, IXL recommends specific skills that will help your child build missing foundations or take the next step with what they've been learning. It is tailor-made for each student. I also like that IXL offers interactive games. These are a fun little break when learning new skills, and kids love them. Put math and language art skills to the test with puzzles, quests, and other games. It's important for us to be involved in our children's education, and IXL is a tool that can really help with this goal. IXL is offering Farmhouse on Boone viewers a 25% discount off your first month or year with my link in the description box below, or by scanning the QR code on screen. Family memberships start at only $7.46 per month. Thanks again IXL for partnering with me on today's video. The next thing we are going to make that I love for breakfast is a sourdough cranberry walnut loaf. This is something that I make every single winter, all throughout the winter, and think, why don't I make this more often? It is so good, and it's really just exactly the same as making normal sourdough bread, except for adding the cranberry and the walnuts. Now, the way that I'm currently making my bread, which I know I've shared about on here probably a million times, is I am doing 2/3 or a little bit over 2/3 whole grain and a little under 1/3 of all-purpose flour. I find that adding just a touch of all-purpose flour gives it that crusty exterior, the chewy interior, that taste that we all know and love with a classic sourdough boule that is cooked in a Dutch oven. Now, this is my beginner sourdough bread recipe, which is over on farmhouseonboone.com, except for a few differences, which I know I always have that caveat, but I double it and then I do a lot more whole grain. So here is what I am doing. I am doing 650 grams of hard white wheat berries. I like to weigh them before they go through the mill. That way I can just throw everything in together, no more measuring from there. 300 grams of all-purpose flour, 650 grams of water, 20 grams of salt, and then sourdough starter. Now, you don't need to measure sourdough starter because it's yeast and it'll take the whole thing over. I like to tell people constantly that I'm a rule breaker when it comes to sourdough. You don't have to have freshly fed sourdough starter. You can pour it in right outside of the refrigerator. It'll work just fine. I do stretch and folds throughout the day, and then on about the third or fourth stretch and fold, I add the cranberries and the walnuts. I like to not do them on the first stretch and fold because they sort of break up the gluten strands that are in the wheat. So on that third or fourth one, we've already developed the gluten nicely, I will add them in, and then I let the dough sit overnight or however long. Right now, the kitchen's nice and cool, so I can let my bread dough go for a really, really long time, which makes it a slow process, but also very little hands-on time. So right now, that bulk ferment, that first ferment where it's just sitting there in the bowl, doubling, I usually let that go for up to 24 hours. This time I did about 18 hours. After that, I divide it in two, shape it, put it into tea towel lined Banneton baskets, and then I start preheating the oven for the bread at 500 degrees, and I put the Banneton baskets right on top of the oven. I learned this trick because my last oven in my last house was a vintage range, and it had a wide spot in the middle of the oven where you could easily put bread dough. And so I learned how to utilize that so much that I just cannot live without it, especially with whole grain. I find that if it ferments too long on the second rise, that it can get a little bit too sour, a little bit over fermented. Not so much that the bread won't turn out right, it just won't taste as great. So I do a nice long first rise. It's a little bit cool because my kitchen's a bit cool, develops a ton of flavor, and then I speed up that second rise by putting it on top of the oven while it's preheating. Once it's preheated, it has risen enough in order to bake it. So I can kind of skip that whole fridge rise, make it a fast process, and then bake it as per usual instructions in the beginner sourdough bread recipe. Another thing that we rely on a lot for breakfast time and for snacks and sandwiches, some kind of sourdough bagels, because they're so easy to make. You don't have to do any stretch and fold. So if it's a dough that you want to kind of mix up and forget it, it's really great for that. There's also lots of different variations that you can do with sourdough bagels. I usually will double the recipe just because one recipe makes for 8 bagels. Of course, with our large family, it's better to have 16 bagels. I do 130 grams of hard white wheat berries per cup of flour the recipe calls for. So in the standard bagel recipe over on my website, that's 4 cups of flour. So I measure 520 grams of hard white wheat berries and then put that through the mill. And That makes for the perfect amount of flour right there in the bowl so I can start mixing up all of the rest of the ingredients. Some sourdough starter, a bit of water, honey, salt, and in this case, some cinnamon as well because I am making the cinnamon crunch bagels. These are excellent, perfect for breakfast in the wintertime. It has that warm cinnamon spice. Once the dough is all mixed up, I let it do a nice long first ferment. This dough doesn't rise a whole lot. It'll rise a bit, but don't be alarmed if it doesn't look like it rose a lot. You will still have great bagels even still. Right now, I am letting it do a first ferment for somewhere between 18 and 24 hours, just like the bread, because the kitchen's cooler. I can get away with that. It has a wonderful flavor. And just like with the cranberry bread I did, I also try to accelerate the bagels rising. After I divide them and shape them, I will make a spot on top of the oven while the oven preheats. In that time frame, also I get a pot of water going so that I can boil the bagels once they have risen enough. So for these bagels, I add a bit of cinnamon to the dough, but then I also create a cinnamon sugar mixture for the top. Again, I will leave the link to this recipe down below, but I'm sure it will be a family favorite for you like it is for us. Let's go sit down and have this, okay? So far, all of the recipes that I've shared with you have been great breakfasts for your everyday. Some you can prepare ahead a bit. You can mix up in the evening if you're less busy then, or in the morning if that's a better time for you. You can make granola ahead on a weekend. You can mix up some sourdough doughs and put them in the refrigerator to slow that process down until you're ready for them. What I'm going to show you today is more of an involved breakfast, so something that you might reach for on a special occasion, maybe a weekend, maybe Christmas morning would be a great time to make these. So I'm going to show you how I make sourdough brioche donuts with a custard filling. Now this recipe is over on the website, but it is actually one with yeast on the website. I am just going to be doing sourdough instead because you can follow directions for yeast recipes exactly as is. Just substitute instead of yeast, add some sourdough starter. It will act in the same way. Now, of course, also you need to allow for a bit longer rise times. This is a very hydrated dough. It has butter in it and eggs, so it's very soft. You need to let it sit for a while, let it all come together before performing stretch and folds. Now, I made this dough a few days in advance, and then after the gluten developed through the stretch and folds, after it did its first bulk ferment, I put it in the refrigerator for a few days. That's why it's looking a bit hard right now, because I made it ahead of time. So even though this one's a tiny bit more involved because you're actually frying the donuts and making a custard filling and filling them, you can still work on it ahead of time. Just like with almost all recipes that I'm doing these days, I substituted the all-purpose for hard white wheat berries. Now, the rule of thumb is if you're doing something that needs to rise, something that you would otherwise knead or stretch and fold where you're really trying to develop the gluten, that's when you use hard white wheat berries. If you're doing something quick like cookies or waffles or pancakes, that's where you would use soft white wheat berries. I just substitute it one for one in this recipe. I typically like to weigh my grains, so I do, again, 130 grams per cup of flour that the recipe calls for. So other than doing hard white wheat berries instead of all-purpose flour and sourdough starter instead of yeast. I am making the recipe exactly as it shows over on my website. I love that in our kitchens, we can learn how to make these simple swaps so we can use what we have on hand and still have the recipe turn out fantastic. I'm almost always doing exclusively whole grain, but using recipes that were originally designed with all purpose, and the results are still fabulous once you really get used to the swaps and the simple rule of thumb. Also with sourdough, taking your favorite yeast recipes and substituting sourdough for the yeast instead, that's another thing that is really a surprisingly very, very easy swap. The custard filling comes together with 1/3 cup of sugar, a teaspoon vanilla, a 1/4 cup of cornstarch, 3 eggs, 1.5 cups of whole milk, and 3 tablespoons of butter. Now, I am always caught without a piping bag. You've probably seen me fill up a Ziploc bag as my piping bag so many times. Well, I finally did go and buy some because it's a little bit embarrassing to always be using a Ziploc bag, but it works just fine. Even though they are 100% whole grain, these donuts turn out light and fluffy, perfect for Christmas morning. Now, they are more delicious when they're freshly fried. I like to use coconut oil or tallow. Even lard is great as long as you render it yourself. I find when I get lard from the butcher when I'm ordering pork, either a whole or a half or whatever it is, it's a little bit strong because it's cooked very quickly. Now, if you render the lard very slowly, you're less likely to have that bacony flavor. So today I just reached for coconut oil. After frying them, I tossed them in some sugar. So good. Now, the last thing on my breakfast menu list is going to be a frittata because eggs are high in protein, a perfect way to start your day. We also do have tons of pork because we got a whole hog a few months ago now. We're actually getting sort of to the end of it, but I'm on my sister's list to get another one, I believe, this coming month. So we'll be restocked in pork soon, plenty of sausage. I love making a sausage frittata. Now, I have the recipe on the blog, but I am substituting sausage for the ham on that recipe, otherwise following it the same. I love a frittata because it's sort of a one-pan wonder. You cook the sausage and the onions or whatever you want to add to it in the pan, then add in the eggs and the rest of everything. Of course, you do get a few bowls dirty, but it cooks mostly on the stove, finishes a bit in the oven, which makes it fast and easy and perfect for either a weekend morning or a busy morning as well. Well, I hope that you enjoyed these breakfast ideas that we are going to be enjoying all winter long.